Okay. Hi, kids. Let me think. I guess we're here to talk about genetics and stuff. Um, Major implications in this lecture. Big deal in agriculture. The College Board has repeatedly asked about the agricultural stuff. I'll get to that first. And then some general trends about genetics, evolution, and species management. I'll get to that second. Um, I think that yesterday you saw a video about Charlie Darwin and evolution and the basics of variation and differential success and fitness, the number of offspring you can have, and so how a species can change over time. Some variants have more babies than others. When Darwin wrote about this, he didn't know about genetics. Mendel hadn't really reached uh, the time of Darwin. And so now we know a lot about genetics. And um, I want you to start, this might be helpful in your notes, think of genes as tools. Um, let's imagine that, like, you call a handyman and I show up and I've got this big truck and you just roll up the door in the back and you can see that I've got every kind of tool imaginable. And I come to your door and you just saw that I have every tool you've ever heard of. And then I say, "Hi, I'm Jose, I'm your handyman. How can I help you?" Whatever kind of problem you've got, I got the tools to fix that. On the other hand, imagine that you call the handyman, I show up and I have one hammer. And you're like, yeah, I've got a problem. And I'm like, hammer. And you're like, yeah, I don't know if you can help me with my water heater. And I'm like, hammer. Genes are like tools. They help you solve problems that might arise tomorrow. And so you and I have a bunch of genes that aren't particularly useful today, but if a new disease arises tomorrow, your absence of nose hairs might be a bummer, and my gnarly ass nose hairs would keep me safe with this new disease. Who knows? Ignoring the nose hairs, the point is that genetic diversity is like a box of tools. Um, and the classic example that is often used to describe this issue is corn. Maybe you can see on the side of my shared screen here, um, corn used to be tremendously diverse. Corn was a wild grass grown all over South and Mesoamerica, I believe. And it had been selectively bred by humans for a long, long time from a very diverse starting pool of grasses. People were like, oh, you can eat these grass seeds. And so some of them were better for popping, and some were better to make flour, and some were better in high elevation or low elevation or hot climate. But you know, the whole point of modern agriculture is to find something you can do really well and then cookie cutter that everywhere. So now we have reduced genetic diversity, and basically the same two or three types of corn are grown everywhere. It's the same corn all over the place. And it works. It's great. I love corn. You can go to the supermarket and eat really sweet, really fast growing, delicious corn. Problem is, conditions are always changing. Um, Nature always changes. And so we found recently that a lot of American corn could not survive a new pest, I believe. And we're encountering again in 2020 that a lot of our commercial corn can't survive drought. And so, holy crap, we have this really reduced gene pool, and now there's no corn surviving. You get a weird bug across the United States, and that entire map of corn can disappear. Or you get an extended drought or an extended heat spell or whatever, and that entire US map could disappear. Um, thank God there are still native populations in South and Mesoamerica that are still growing ancestral corn, because we can go back there find some of those species that are okay with the pest or that are okay with the drought, interbreed them with our stuff, and thank God we have a big box of tools, a whole bunch of genetic diversity somewhere else. Now, same thing goes for wildlife. We recently found that, like a few weeks ago, that California mountain lions just had the best breeding year ever. And everybody's like, hooray, the mountain lions are coming back. They're a federally protected species. They're very rare. We believe that they're ecologically beneficial. And so either because you believe the ecology or because you understand federal law, we got to protect mountain lions. Everybody's celebrating, woo woo. We have all these extra mountain lions. And then when you take blood samples and you send them off to the lab, it turns out that they're practically clones. They're very, very similar to each other. So like, yeah, you can have 10,000 copies of the same genes, but if they're the same genes, they're not going to survive future changes. And remember, nature always changes. So even though we have rising numbers of mountain lions, we actually have decreasing genetic diversity of mountain lions. It appears that there was like one stud that just had sex with all of his sisters or something. So there's a lot of effort in ecology to keep populations connected so that you get a lot of outbreeding, keep these separate groups breeding with each other instead of inbreeding within small groups. That would be very dangerous. What we're trying to avoid is what's called a bottleneck. Get ready to draw. I want to show you some pictures. I got a lot of pictures of the same thing. So here's one picture of a bottleneck. You can see that the parent population at the top had a whole bunch of genetic variation, and something happened that reduced population. So after that event, you've lost a lot of the genes. You can see that the only genes left are green and yellow. Give me a minute. Here's another one. Population with high genetic diversity on the left of your screen. Some kind of a catastrophic event that cuts off a whole bunch of individuals, and the only ones left are only representing a few of those genetic varieties. Here's another picture of the same thing. A genetic bottleneck is a catastrophic event that lowers population. So there's only a few people left, a few individuals left. And whichever those individuals are, they can't possibly have the total genetic diversity of the original population. So their offspring will have far less genetic diversity than the original population. There's a famous example of this. We used to have gazillions of elephant seals, but elephant seals were driven practically to extinction by hunting. We like their fur, their blubber, or something. It was probably their fat. We probably use it for lamp oil. So population size, we think, got down to about 18, 19, 20 individuals. And hooray, they've come back. We have huge populations of elephant seals, but they have way less variation than before. Imagine if a handyman shows up at your house and you're like, well, hello, and he opens the box truck and it's like, check it out, I got all these tools, and they're all hammers. Two parts that we need to manage in conservation. Populations are important, but maintaining genetic diversity is probably even more important. So like China does this really amazing thing where they lend out panda bears, but you're not allowed to decide which panda bears breed. So if you're a zoo, you can call China and rent a panda bear. Every panda bear in American zoos is owned by China. And China has this office full of nerds that does all the math, and they've decided how to maintain the most diversity And so they'll rent you a boy, they'll rent you a girl, they'll rent you a couple, they'll rent you a pregnant one, whatever you want. A zoo can pay for the panda bears, but China controls the breeding to guarantee optimum genetic diversity as they grow panda bear populations. That's actually pretty smart. We made a mistake a long time ago. We had a whole bunch of cheetahs. Cheetahs were hunted, their habitat was reduced. And so as cheetah populations started to shrink, we were like, okay, we're going to protect this area, and we're going to protect this area, and we're going to protect this area. And what we did is we ended up inbreeding this group of 12 cheetahs, this group of 12 cheetahs, and this group of 12 cheetahs. And when you inbreed, you lose variation. The secret now is to find populations that are a genetic risk. That means a small population or an isolated population, and resolve that by connectivity. So genetic risk is a vocab term, and connectivity is a vocab term. I'm sorry that they're not on your screen. You're still responsible for these. Genetic risk means genetic diversity is low and could get lower through inbreeding or lack of outbreeding. Connectivity is to take isolated populations like the cheetah in a few parks in Africa and try to connect those. Key issue about the cheetahs, just to give you a heads up, Africa's a continent, not a country. Shocker for some, I know. And so what happens with cheetah is that they're in many different nations, and those countries might not be friendly. So there's a group over here in Tanzania, and a group over here in Malawi, and a group over here in South Africa. I'm sorry, I don't know my countries. And each of those don't really have access across international borders, so they get kind of inbred in place. This happens with grizzly bears in the US and Canada. One other thing I want to tell you about genetics. There's another problem with having small populations, and this is called genetic drift. Genetic drift is when random effects or random events affect variation. They affect the total diversity. And I want you to imagine that there's a room with 4 people. Pick any 4 you want from our class. Just imagine 4 of them. And for some random reason, slip on a banana peel, get struck by lightning. One of those individuals dies randomly, stung by a bee, I don't care, whatever. Now, if you only had 4 individuals and one of them dies, that's going to have a huge impact on the genetic diversity of your population. Because when you cut out 1/4 of the genes, you might have lost the redhead or the curly hair or the straight hair or the blonde or the black hair or the whatever, I don't know. You might have lost the tallest one, or you might have lost the shortest one. And that's not evolution. That's not natural selection. That's not adaptive. It was just a random event. But when you lose the tall kid, there goes the tall genes. Now, if that same person was part of a giant population, imagine all of the United States, and we lose the one tall kid, that's cool, man. There's a lot of tall genes left. If out of the entire US population you lost a redhead, don't worry, there's gingers all over the place. The point of genetic drift is that a random event can affect total genetic diversity, but that can only happen with small populations. Remember that genetic diversity can change for a reason. Selective breeding, I want a shorter dog. Natural selection, being tall is better so that you can reach harder to get food. Okay, that's genetic diversity changing for a reason. That's selective, that's evolving, either because we're doing something or because nature's selecting something. But when genetic diversity changes randomly, we call that genetic drift, where the genetic average is just kind of getting shorter because the tall guy died at random, or getting darker because the light-skinned one died at random, or whatever. Genetic drift, random populations. All right. Come at me with your questions. I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching my video.